Hey everybody, what's going on? Eric here with Switch Adapted Toys, and today I'm going to be showing you how to adapt this light spinner. This is a really good sensory toy. You know, a lot of kids like to stim on the lights. There's some vibrations there. So if your child really likes those kind of sensory inputs, this is a really good toy to adapt. The best part is it's really inexpensive. Today is April 5th. I got this at Walmart for $5. So you can go to Walmart, get this specific one, but if you don't have this specific one, they are all really similar. So you should be able to use this video to adapt the one that you have. And yeah, really easy, so let's get into it. But first, if you like this video, if you find it helpful, please hit like and subscribe. We are posting new videos all the time, and it really does help us out in a huge way, so thanks in advance for that. But yeah, let's get into it. Alright, the first thing you want to do is remove the 4 screws that are on the back of the toy. So with those 4 screws removed, we should be able to split the toy in half, just like that. Alright, so I'm just going to remove this button so that you can see how this switch works. You can see that there's 2 wires that go to this switch. We could do one of 2 things to adapt this toy. We could basically snip off these wires and solder our headphone jack wires directly to these 2 wires. And that would basically bypass this entire switch. The cons of doing that is that you won't be able to use this switch any longer. It'll only operate when you press your external switch. So the other thing we could do is just solder our headphone jack wires to each one of these nodes, leaving the wires and the switch intact. That way we maintain the functionality of this button while also adding the ability for it to be operated by an external switch. So that's what I'm going to do, but if you think it's going to be easier for you just to snip those off and get rid of this button, you could totally do that as well. So before we do anything, we need to drill our holes so that we can get our headphone jack wire into the toy. So since the prongs on this switch come out on this side of the toy, that's where I'm going to drill my hole. It's just right down through here, out the back of the toy. Alright, now that we have our hole drill, we need to prep our headphone jack wire. So I've got my headphone jack wire. We buy these as splitters, so you actually get 2 wires for the price of 1 item. It's a little bit more cost effective when you do it that way, but I don't need the male end of this cord, so I'm just going to snip it off and remove it. So now I've got 2 wires, but I'm only going to need 1. Next I need to remove the black casing on the outside of the headphone jack. So inside this headphone jack we have 3 wires. We've got a white wire, a red wire, and a bunch of bare copper wires. Alright, so when we're dealing with these headphone jack wires, we're dealing with what's called a TRS connector. That stands for tip, ring, and sleeve. Think of like a stereo headphone jack. The problem is that many buttons that are out there use a TS connector, so there is no ring. So what we have to do on our headphone jack is combine the ring and sleeve wires together and leave the tip wire separate. Now we got a lot of people ask, why can't I just cut one of them off and just disconnect it completely? Well, depending on where the connector is on the female end, it could be touching either the sleeve or the ring, and we don't really know. So what we have to do is just combine those 2. That way, regardless of what you plug your toy into or how your headphone jack wire is set up, it's going to operate properly. So another way to think of this whole thing, or maybe the easiest way, is that we need to identify which wire is the tip wire, and then we need to combine the other 2 wires. So how do you figure out which wire is the tip wire? Well, you're probably going to have to do some trial and error. What I would do is I would remove a little bit of the casing on each of the wires and combine 2 of them and solder it to a toy and see if it works. If it doesn't, then you know you need to try a different combination of 2 wires. We buy a bunch of wires, and we've found kind of over the course of doing this for a long time that if you have a white wire, oftentimes the white wire will be the tip wire. So that's not always going to be the case. In fact, I've seen wires where the red wire is the tip wire, but that's where I would probably start and try that first, and if it doesn't work, then try a different combination. but I would initially start with the white wire being the tip wire and combine the red wire and the bare wires, or whatever the other wire is inside your headphone jack. Again, all of these are different, so that's what makes it a little bit challenging. For me, I know that I need to leave the white wire separate and combine the red and the bare wires together, and so that's what I'm going to do now. So in order to combine those two wires, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove some of the casing off of the red wire, and then I'm going to twist the red wire and bare wires together, making sure that the wires actually make contact with one another, just like that. And now I've got a bunch of exposed wire down here that I don't really want to be exposed, so what I'm going to use is a heat shrink wire cover, and that's going to slip over my wire and protect it so it doesn't accidentally touch something else and short something out. So I've got a little bit of heat shrink wire cover here. What I am going to do is basically just cut it to length, just leaving about 1/4 inch of the wire exposed, and you just slip it over the wire, and then we're going to use a heat gun to heat that up, and we'll shrink down that wire cover, making it secure. Okay, and then I need to remove a little bit of the white wire, just like that. Alright, now I can fish this through the hole that we drilled in the toy. So what I want to do before I solder to this switch is actually get some solder on the wires. That's just going to make it a little bit easier for me to make that connection when I go to actually put it onto the switch. This doesn't need to look pretty, it just needs to get the job done. And this is not very difficult, so don't let this part scare you. One tip I will give you is make sure that those wires are nice and like twisted together. You don't want a bunch of wires kind of going everywhere. So just twist them together, try to get one nice wire when you're soldering. Alright, so now we can solder the wires to the button. So I got my wires hooked up. To be honest with you, the wires inside this toy were really cheap. Just by moving the button around, it dislodged both of the wires that were going to this button. So if that happens to you, all I did was basically strip the wires back a little bit more and then solder it back to the button. So if that happens to you, it's not hard to fix. You can totally do it. Don't worry about it. It happens. Before I go and put everything back together, there's a couple things I want to do. First, I want to check and make sure that both the button still works and the external switch work. There we go. So before I put it all back together, what I want to do is secure the wire with a zip tie. I'm going to put the zip tie around the wire, and the zip tie is going to be inside the toy. What that does is basically act like a barrier, so that if a child or somebody were to yank on the cord, it doesn't just yank the whole cord out of the toy. So I'm going to wrap my zip tie around my headphone jack wire and cinch it down as tight as I possibly can. And I'm going to snip off the excess zip tie. Now what I like to do is add a little bit of CA glue or super glue around that zip tie. That just prevents the zip tie from slipping. So I'm just going to put a little bit of glue around that zip tie, just like that. And then I'm going to use a little bit of activator. And that basically dries that up instantly. So I put the button back in its housing, and on the button there's a little notch. And you just want to make sure that notch is going straight up and down, because that will line up with the notch that's in the front plate of the toy. And so I'm going to replace the front and screw in the 4 screws on the back of the toy. Alright, so let's give our button one last press and just make sure that everything still works. There we go. So, pretty easy toy to adapt, you know, for $5. I mean, there's a reason why it's only $5. A lot of the internals inside are pretty cheap. But for $5, you get to learn how to switch adapt the toy. You know, if your child really likes these sensory inputs, you know, we all know a lot of kids that like to stem on these lights. This is a really, I mean, $5, that's hard to beat. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, please hit like and hit subscribe, because we're posting new videos all the time. If you want to find out more about Switch Adapted Toys, you can do so on our website at www.switchtoys.org. There we've got all different kinds of resources all about switch adapting toys, and it's all completely free. We've got more videos, we've got written manuals, we even have files for you to 3D print your own switch button, and it can save you a ton of money compared to going out and buying the name brand switches. So check out all those resources there on our website, and I'll put a link in the description below. If you've got a group or an organization and you want to serve your community by adapting toys and giving them away to kids in your community, you can form what we call a Switch chapter. We've got them all across the country now. You can find out more information about that on our website. We have a ton of resources for you to do that and serve your community in that way. Lastly, if you're interested in a Switch adapted toy but you don't really want to go through the hassle of doing it yourself, we do have an Etsy shop where I'll switch adapt the toy for you and it'll be ready to play with, and the proceeds go to support what we're doing here. So I'll put a link in the description below and you can check that out if you'd like. So I guess that's it. I'm Eric with Switch Adapted Toys, and until next time, we'll see you.
Switch Adapted Toys, making play possible.